At GeoComply, we're proud to be supporting this important initiative and uplifting the voices of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, advancing the conversation around mental health and supporting change. We hope you enjoy the series and the discussions that follow.
Anin Buju Nigijnaga Jay Simpson. Hi, my name's Jay Simpson. I'm an Oji Cree Soto Two-Spirit trans woman from the Sapatuet Cree Nation, currently living on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples, colonially known as Vancouver, British Columbia. I had the opportunity to share space with some really brilliant people, and so one of them was my lesbian grandmothers. They were actually my half-sister's biological grandmothers, but they went to court to fight for custody over myself as well because their son, my sister's father, had adopted me. And so these queer folks during my formative years were really present for me, and so I am really glad to have gotten that opportunity to be loved by them. I think one of the things that was complicated in some of my teenage years was I grew up in Langley and Aldergrove, and so the nature of my community was very conservative. And it was like very apparent that I was a queer child, and then also I was a queer native child in foster care, so I was dealing with a lot of these stigmatizing ideas of who I was. And so I had a very restricted life where I didn't get to express myself, and so there was a lot of things going on that I felt like I couldn't breathe, and so I had to navigate the mental health system on top of it, which was not easy because in foster care it's just a bunch of wait lists, and they give you 3 sessions, and once you're done, and then you go on the wait list again. And so there was a lot of grief of trying to figure out who I wanted to be and who I was. I think I would say to myself to give myself some more slack to be myself and to have more space. I had so much shame back then for even just existing that I feel like if I had given myself just a little bit more space, I feel like I wouldn't have had to do so much of the healing that I've had to do. But then also at the same time, like I would tell 13-year-old me that like, you were so right and everyone else was so wrong. And that, you know, a gaslight child is still a child. When I first came out, a lot of my experiences were of a plus size person. And then when I began to transition, I experienced a lot of trans misogyny, and I still do today. But I feel like I haven't been accepted for a lot of reasons, but one of them is the ways in which desirability come into play in the queer community, and how some corporations have instilled a foundation of immediacy. And so I feel like I haven't been seen as someone who is important or worthy of acknowledgement or honor in the community unless I was fuckable. And that kind of changed when I published a book, and people began to see me as this person who has very important things to say. And then I began to explore with gender expression and performance and drag, and people got to see a multitude of my personality and my experiences. And I think that's changed my life radically, where I feel like I'm finally getting my flowers now. And it's over the past 2 years, and it feels good, but I'm very well aware that the feeling is the feeling of vindication and not celebration. I maintain positive mental health by being very exceptionally firm with my boundaries. It's taken a long time for me to figure out what my capacity is and what I can do and what I can hold. But one of the things that I am very adamant about is I will pursue what brings me joy. And if there are folks who want to interrupt that, I ask them to interrupt it later. And I ask folks, like, are you interrupting because there's a concern for my physical well-being, or are you interrupting because it's something to do with yourself? And so one of the things I find as like Indigenous trans woman in the public eye is that there's a lot of narratives about me that are performed without me. And that kind of perception is not my own doing. And so I like to say that my actions speak louder for other people's words. And I'm rambling right now, but I think one of the things I maintain is that if I get the space to create the art I want to create, that means that I can populate the canon with hope. And that helps me keep on going. But then also, healing is super nonlinear, and like every 2 weeks I have a meltdown and I turn it into I turn it into art. But that art is for me because part of maintaining my positive mental state is realizing that some of the art I make is for myself, and some of the art that I make I get to edit in order to share with other people. And I think that's been very important in honoring my pain, and that like my experiences doesn't have to be something that can be created to be like monetized and like performed. Some things can just stay in the diary. The cis narrative of queerness is exceptionally boring. You are all so boring. I'm just gonna say that. We'll cut that though. I just needed to say it so badly. Transgenderify now. You're not living transgenderedly? Oh.
What was your favorite thing to do as a teen?
As a teen, shoplift. Anin Buju Nigishnaga Jay Simpson. Hello, my name is Jay Simpson. I just introduced myself in Ojibwe. That being said, I am an Ojibwe person from Sapatuyak Cree Nation, which is not of these territories, but we are currently residing, and this panel is taking place on the unceded territories of the Hamasquiyam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Very specifically, we are in the downtown east side, which is very close to the village Lekleki, which was displaced early on in colonization, where very recently the statue of Gassy Jack was removed. I would also like to acknowledge that we are very, very close to what is formerly known as Hogan's Alley, which, if you are not aware of, I invite you to educate yourself on the displacement of Black Vancouverites and the very racist history of the city of Vancouver. We're also very close to what was formerly known as Japantown, which was dissolved and destroyed during Japanese internment, in which British Columbia and Vancouver have a long history in participating in. We are also very close to Chinatown. We are in Chinatown. And gentrification is displacing our citizens. One of the things I would also like to say, and something I picked up from my friend Chris, is that we walk gently while we're here. We are in a neighborhood that is over-policed and being poisoned. And so while we are here to just walk gently through these streets that are home to so many folks, and as someone who is intergenerationally related to the downtown east side, that is very important for me. My mother lived here. She also died here. So I'm going to do some house rules, but I also would like us to take a deep breath if we want to, okay? Fantastic, thank you. Pride would not be possible without corporate support. We would like to thank our event sponsor, Geo Comply, and our season sponsor, TD. Thanks to our fabulous production members at Queer Based Media and everyone at Vancouver Black Library. And of course, thank you to the audience for being here today. Now let's give everyone a round of applause. So what is the learning series? Great question, as a moderator. That was funny, come on, I'm not I've got some jokes, please. The Learning Series is a multidisciplinary initiative that strives to create a platform that uplifts, inspires, and reconnects individuals in the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. In theory, it is an in-depth look at stories from the equity-deserving groups that will showcase their queer lived experiences with mental health through video content, and a live-streamed in-person panel. Our in-person panel will be moderated by myself, Jay Simpson, and the panel consists of 4 influential speakers: Siobhan, Shetin, Joey, and Jag. This is an initiative we hope to provide support, highlight resources, and establish lasting change within our 2S LGBTQA+ community. And it says, transition to first speaker video. Jay exits stage and watches from the side.
My name is Jag Nagra. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a queer Punjabi mother. I grew up in a multi-generational home. I had a full house. My 2 grandmothers lived with us, my parents, my brother, 2 sets of uncles with their wives. So it was, a lot of people around us all the time, very loving and just a fun childhood. My parents worked a lot. They were new immigrants to Canada, and through no fault of their own. They were trying to give us a really good life and try to become financially stable and stuff in a new country. But I never really felt a lack of people around us, just love. Whether it was cousins visiting, whether it was different aunts and uncles, there was always people around us. And I just remember spending all our entire summers outdoors. We had a huge backyard, and just people were over all the time. For a lot of my life, I thought I was the only queer Punjabi person. Or I don't even know if I had the vocabulary to explain that at the time, but I just felt very isolated. And it wasn't until I found a group that supported queer South Asians locally, that was when I realized there's other people like me out there. And that was sort of the beginning of the rest of my life in a way, just finding a sense of connection and understanding that I never had before. So I think being queer and being Punjabi, for a lot of my life, there wasn't a place where I could be both at the same time. And there wasn't really a mold I found myself in, or, didn't think there was a place for myself. So just unlearning certain expectations that are put on us, in society, whether it's being queer, whether it's being Indian, and realizing that there can be a space for both of those identities to exist at the same time, and that's okay, and that's perfectly normal. I think if I had spent less time trying to change who I was or trying to hide who I was, if I had just accepted myself earlier, I would have been a lot further ahead, at any given time in my life. But the thing, I think, when I look back, sometimes 1 year or, just a couple months can change your life so drastically. And, if you're struggling, if you're in the closet, if you, don't see any way out of the closet, you never know what's ahead. So, I've been in my life depressed and gone through a lot of struggles, and just looking back, things change so drastically sometimes for the better, in ways that you never even expected. So just try to stay strong for your future self, right? Just try to be there for yourself, and I think amazing things can happen. I think the first time I started really interacting with the queer community was when I found this group for South Asians. And that was the first time I got involved in any real way. And at that time, I think just having other Punjabi people, we had similar yet different upbringings, but we all could relate in a way where I didn't necessarily feel like I fit in the mainstream otherwise. So it wasn't until I found them that it was okay, we're in this together, and we're gonna be okay. My children are a huge part of why I advocate for mental health, because I don't want them to struggle the way I did with my mental health for so long. And if they have anything to tell us at any point in their lives, I want them to feel comfortable and have it be second nature that they would come to us. The other thing I think that's really important for me is the more queer people that are seen, the easier it gets for other people who are struggling. I'm trying to be a voice for those people who don't have a voice. A lot of my friends even, they might not, they're kind of living double lives sometimes. They're not able to be open around their families. It's up to our community to be that voice for each other and try to be that representation that's gonna help change society and change people's minds about who we are and what we stand for.
So we'll get straight to it, okay?
All right.
Okay. How does the lack of visibility or representation of queer South Asians in media and society impact your mental health?
That's a great question. I think for probably most of my life, I felt a huge sense of isolation. You know, there was no representation. And I often say this, like Ellen DeGeneres was the lesbian that everybody knew, and kind of like the first introduction for our parents to see another like queer person out there. But as far as people like with my skin color or my upbringing, there was nobody to look to. So I mean, you can imagine how much that would affect you, right? Like you feel like, you know, something's wrong with me. And like I said in that video, like I didn't have the vocabulary to know that I was queer or, you know, what it meant. And I think there's so much othering that happens. I think it still happens in the queer community that it's just like those people over there, you know, I'm Punjabi, I'm not like them. So I think there was a lot of confusion in my upbringing.
Have you seen any representation on TV that is bringing you joy right now, or in media that's like sparked something for you?
I think more so than media, just the local community around here, like Share Vancouver, who I've been with. It's a group for South Asians, queer South Asians. I've been a member since 2008. Seeing how many people come to, you know, monthly events, or just seeing people feeling comfortable in their own skin to come out is so different than 2008 when I joined. There were so few South Asians at that time. So I think, yeah, more than media, it's the local community that makes me feel like alive.
That's fantastic. Oh, I love hearing that,
Yeah.
and how we are popularizing our own community and forming that connection.
Yeah.
Language is so interesting because we oftentimes don't have it, and then when we find it, it's colonial definitions for what we are, and then that feels like it sets a precedence. Have you been finding yourself exploring what language feels for yourself as well?
That's interesting. One thing I'm going to say about language, like a common question, like when I have done speaking engagements or been on the radio with South Asian media, often a question that comes up is, oh, we don't even have a word for being gay in Punjabi. And then it ends up being like the elders all talking, you know, trying to figure out, is it this word, correcting each other, right? So I think in the Punjabi context, like, yeah, there's still, if I'm talking to my like uncle in India, like I wouldn't know how to explain it necessarily in words, right? So I think there's that dual thing of like having the English language and Punjabi language, and I don't know, there's no intersection sometimes.
I really relate to that. Thank you for sharing. How do you navigate the often conflicting cultural and familial expectations around gender and sexuality as a queer South Asian person?
Yeah, I think for South Asians, for our parents, having their kids be married is such a huge thing they look to. As soon as your child is born, like you start dreaming about their wedding and you start saving up for their wedding. So there's so much pressure in our community, right, put on us. And like for myself, I one little tidbit, I have an older brother who's also queer. So I think at a certain time in our lives, we internally, before we even had come out to each other, he said this before too, like my parents aren't going to get my wedding, but they're going to get Jaggu is my Punjabi name, Jaggu's wedding, right? There's just so much pressure put on us, and not having the education around queerness in our elders. I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen, and breaking down these like expectations that are put on us from a cultural standpoint. And I feel like growing up, there was always like, I'm Punjabi at home, but I have to be Canadian out there, right? And I grew up in Maple Ridge, and very like white city growing up. We were one of maybe like 4 Indian families. None of us talked to each other probably. And I've lost my train of thought there
that's
right as I was
okay.
speaking. I don't know where I was going with that.
And that's okay. We can always come back to
Okay,
it.
it'll come.
Conversations are
Yes.
non-linear here. Can you speak to the specific challenges or barriers you face in accessing mental health resources as a queer South Asian person?
Yeah, first I want to say I have an amazing therapist who I've seen for like 15 years. She has like quite literally saved my life. Like she's incredible. But I think there's a huge thing, like if, for example, if you want to find a South Asian therapist, they don't have necessarily that training to talk about queer issues that we're facing, right? They don't have that knowledge or understanding. So that in itself is a barrier, right? And then that same dynamic of being, this is where I was going in the earlier question, being Punjabi at home and trying to be Canadian and fit in with your white friends or, expectations there. It's a really confusing time, right? So, I think there are challenges in just trying to be understood, I think, is a huge barrier. I think, so much of our lives is spent justifying who we are, unfortunately, and trying to show everybody we're like everybody else. There's nothing wrong with us. And it's like that, like it's tiring trying to talk about it and trying to educate people that you're trying to get help from. It's really a challenge sometimes.
It's very hard trying to prove your humanity to someone who you want to just have a conversation with for your own well-being.
Yeah.
And that exhaustive conversation drains us, especially as QT/BIPOC folks.
Totally.
And I really feel the sometimes leading double, triple, quadruple lives and trying to maintain this semblance of okayness.
Yeah, exactly.
And being from the burbs.
Yeah, you know.
I do know,
yeah.
Yeah, whenever I wanted to seek help, they would send me to an Indigenous counselor and I would be like, I think I'm queer. And they'd be like,
yes.
So you're Native.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'm queer. Those two cannot be removed.
Exactly.
They are who I am and I cannot compartmentalize.
Exactly. Yeah. And each of those, each of those identities feeds into each other and you can't separate it. You can't be like, I need to talk about my Indian issues and then my queer issues over here. It's all the same.
It
right?
is the same, yes. Oh, thank you. How do you balance your culture? Oh, this one I feel on a different level.
Who wrote these?
I'm pretty sure it was you. I didn't.
I did write.
Deep breath. How do you balance your cultural identity with your queer identity? We kind of talked about it, but we're going to get into it more. And how has this affected your mental health?
Greatly it's affected it. Having to make a space for yourself and be brave enough, I guess, if I can use that word, to stand up. And, my mom has a huge extended family. There's probably 600 of us in Surrey alone. Everyone from their village is in Surrey, basically. And I want to say huge shout out to my parents. They've been huge advocates for my brother and I. They've just advocated for us so much. They've supported us so much publicly, in our family as well. So everybody knows that we're queer. Everyone knows I have 2 kids with my wife. And, it took a lot of bravery, I think, for them, whether they know it or not, to stand up and show their solidarity with us, right? And not be afraid of it. And that's been huge in having other people, I never imagined these 80-year-old relatives would be calling my mom and asking how my kids are or how my wife is, right? And this is the life I'm living now. I don't need to be so afraid. So I think often it's one person taking the lead and it's scary to stand up and show who you are. But once you do it, it's you can use that opportunity to teach people and to challenge their own cultural biases or, these expectations they have.
Wow, I'm just so overcome, and I just think that we are not the held breaths of our family who cannot be there for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for all that you've shared. I cannot wait to see what we discuss in the larger conversation.
Yes.
But I think we have to move on to the next video.
All right.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Round of applause.
My name is Siobhan Barker. I use seal, they, and she. I am a community advocate and a consultant in areas of equity and disability justice, body liberation, and food justice. And I'm also a storyteller. My childhood was, I guess, kind of interesting in that my parents were together, so that's kind of novel. And I had my father live with disability. He was an amputee, and it really framed the lens of how I experienced the world, listening to him and observing how he navigated a lot of barriers and the intersection between racial and ability-based barriers were quite significant at the time that he was trying to solidify himself in the Canadian landscape. I actually wrote a piece that actually explored the differences in, like, generationally, but how he navigated living with disability compared to how I'm navigating living with disability. And there were a lot of areas that generationally he didn't push back on. Like, it was like there was a cap on how much oppression you could deal with at any one time. Because my parents were such social justice warriors in their own right, I felt quite driven to engage in things as well. And so, any kind of oppression that found itself at our door, I would see my parents going to the school board meetings and fighting against policies and enacting change. And so I did that on my sort of child scale level with, like, playground equipment, and feeling that there was a high percentage of injuries happening with the pebbled gravel that was underneath all the playground equipment. And so I did a multi-school petition to enact change around the playground equipment and get that sort of spongy material put in underneath the playground equipment. And then I felt quite powerful and full of myself. And so when they started to engage in gender-based oppression, like female identified children were not to wear shorts, they were only to wear skirts in the summer, I can't remember all of them now, but something was wrong. Siobhan was going to start a petition and bring about change. And you could definitely find me fairly precocious, going up to, like, school board presidents saying, "You work for me and the taxes I pay for my candy and other things, and change needs to come." And I think it moved the needle on a few things that may not have been on other folks' radar at the time. But from a young age, if it felt unfair, I was told to look at it more closely and try and enact change where you can.
How do you maintain your positive mental health?
A lot of the times I do not maintain my positive mental health. A lot of the times I carry a lot of sadness or depression or grief over things that I can't change. I would say the ways that I do honor positivity is by accepting that there's a lot of times when it doesn't fit, and giving myself permission to not be some mad, overly happy person that we all want to do away with, because that ain't real. It's about showing the cracks and saying, this is a hard day. this day is kicking my ass, or this, series of whatever. And that, I think, is me honoring when I am being positive and accepting that that is part of the positivity, is acknowledging that it isn't there all the time. And that's okay. There's always been multiple identities in play, and there's always been multiple platforms of oppression. I don't think it's on us as queer, BIPOC, disabled individuals to parse out the elements of our identity to make other assholes' lives easier. It's about them learning up to be able to work and love and live with us.
Hi, Seal.
Hello, Jay.
Oh, it's so lovely to have you here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here.
Can I just say that you are very important to me, and I'm so glad that we get to do this together.
We do lots together.
We do.
Because we're so wonderful.
You really are wonderful.
Thank you.
We're going to get into some questions. We'll have some conversations, and Jay will keep us accountable for time.
Good luck. Ask me how I am. Let's see
where that goes 20 minutes later. But you know what? I'd listen to you for 21 minutes.
Ooh. Love and friendship.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so you've sent some questions. We're going to play. We're going to have fun.
Okay.
And we're going to get very serious.
Oh, goodness. Are there prizes?
You are the prize.
Yes. You know I love treats. I just say it into a room. Yes.
We'll get
if
you
you feel
another
compelled to
cookie.
give me a treat, then I'm open to accepting it.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love our time together. How does mental health intersect with the Black queer identity?
Already I hate these questions, and I know I wrote them. I'm like, what were you thinking?
You were the author.
I know. It was after a lot of wine. And late last night or early this morning. Let's see. Tell me again. Ask me again.
I turned to the page and
Oh,
I've got
no.
holes in my brain. So let's do this again. How does mental health intersect with the Black queer identity?
Well, I mean, some of it was captured in the video around the notion of trying to be asked to choose an identity and to only engage on that level. I find that inside the Black community, there's still often a lot of work that needs to be done around disability justice and understanding of visible and invisible disability. And then when you if you shift over, to the Black queer community, there's often still that kind of like shift that needs to happen again around disability justice. Maybe it's just everybody needs to work on disability justice, Jay. Okay, yeah, okay, it's coming clear to me now. So, yes, now that we've discovered that problem in the world, just now, today, the truth is that, I can't parse out one piece of my identity. It's not feasible. And I can't choose which is more significant in a given situation. I feel that bringing my whole self into things and inviting other people to bring their whole self into things has to be looking at all of those identities at the same time.
Without being in the spaces in which we are asked to leave parts behind, it often feels like it's not just a non-acknowledgement, but an act of violence on the communities also that exist in those intersections.
Very much. I mean, the invisibilization of the Black community in Canada, full stop, right? When you reference Hogan's Alley and the area, and every city has an area where the Black and Asian community, through urban renewal, have been pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with this shift is that people come to, as time pass, accept or believe, oh no, these communities didn't exist, or well, we're just going to deal with this as an anti-Black racism thing, but we're not going to look at how being queer intersects with that. Or, events get planned and there's nothing accounting for any accessibility needs, right? We are going to change the world for able-bodied people, right? Mm-hmm. And it is violent. It is violent. If you're leaving out those elements of people's identity, it is an act of violence.
I would even go further in saying that by not including disability justice in queer spaces and prioritizing BIPOC spaces, is isolating them now causes further mental health issues and exacerbates the problem, which in itself contributes to acts of genocide against our communities.
I was saying just earlier today, when I talk about mental health in a North American context, in a Black North American context, my opinion is we're all dealing with mental health. That the perpetual oppression of racism, the systemic anti-Blackness that's prevalent, the white supremacy culture that dictates what has and who has and what actions have value, we are all dealing with mental health. Whether it's acknowledged or not is another piece. Mm-hmm. But you cannot live with continual oppressive barriers being perpetrated against you without that affecting your mental health. So, true, is it stigmatized in the Black community? Yes, mental health is still an area that's stigmatized. It's still an area where growth has to happen and learning needs to happen. I think, and oftentimes, people think, oh, this is their struggle, right? This is their struggle. This is their struggle. I'm about collective liberation. I'm about recognizing that the system that's oppressing this or that is also oppressing me. Mm-hmm. And so, perhaps as a starting point, recognizing that we are all living with mental health mm-hmm. needs that, maybe it won't be parsed out as somebody else's problem.
The idea of it being someone else's problem is not acknowledging the bigger picture of white supremacy, where the left hand may be hurting this community, but the right hand is hurting that. They're part of the same body.
Exactly.
So let's address that. Thank you. Let's get to some more wine-induced questions, shall we? We'll cut that. Chris might not. We'll strawberry filter it, if anything. Are there things that make things?
I know. See, I told you. It was late. There were no glasses in play, and there was wine.
Okay.
There's so many things in that sentence.
There are so many things that are things that are things. I'm gonna move to the next one because I can't read that question. I did the same thing this week. Fair. I was like, I need a glass of red.
I don't know. It all seems so small. I wasn't using the computer. It was on my phone. And
you know what? I really relate to that.
There we go.
What are some of your earliest memories of mental health being discussed?
Okay. So I wrote this and I thought, this would be a fun question. So I'll have to think back. And when I think back, I think to the ways that euphemisms were used. Like it wasn't ever like full on, this person's dealing with a depression. This person's dealing with anxiety. There was, this person's in a sadness because such and such happened to them. Mm-hmm. Or, there were all these sort of uber Caribbean politeness kind of words that were meant to explain what was going on for folks. And yet you could talk about it, but there were also expectations around how long it was supposed to last, mm-hmm. right? And the duration of what was permissible sadness or permissible grief or permissible anxiety, right? And if you went outside of those boundaries, that's when you become problematic. oh, no one knows why so-and-so is still, you know, and it goes on like that. But yeah, I would say I was fortunate in that there were attempts at least to acknowledge and to name what was going on for different people in the community. You know, there's a lot of things that I got seriously twisted. I mean, inside my family, I'm sort of was the youngest of my generation of cousins, and I got a lot of misinformation, Jay. Like, you know, I can remember visiting with one aunt, and it was like Christmas wrapping ordeal, and there was an injury. You know, they always say, "Watch where you put the scissors." It was in a cushion on the couch. My aunt did not watch where the scissors were put, and we ended up at the hospital. You know, it was very difficult to bring someone with scissors impaled where they were impaled to the hospital. And then so this happened. And then we got back home, and there was talk of like, so and so isn't gonna have children. And for me, I thought, no, the scissors have ended that for her, right? I mean, they were not connected, and no one corrected me. And so there's like a lot of misinformation that I had in my little mind over the cause and effect of things that weren't necessarily, you know. And my mother would just make statements like, "We're all a little bi," you know. She just like, there's just conversation. Like, we're just walking, and then she'll just go, "We're all a little bi," and I'll be like, "Okay, I'll just tuck that away." So, I mean, if we're all bi, then really there's nothing to talk about, you know. I mean, you know, they didn't delve into gender-based elements because that wasn't the language of the time. But, you know, it would be something that was meant to introduce something and take the problematic nature of what's being said outside of the home away, right? I mean, she had a lot of statements. Sometimes friends are like milk. There's an expiry date.
You know what? She may have been onto something.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Just maybe a little bit.
Just a tiny bit.
I really relate to the idea in which not I relate to, but acknowledge and like recognize the ways in which culturally the way we process things is handled. As a kid, my foster mom from Trinidad and Tobago, where the children do not grieve. We are not allowed to grieve.
Okay.
And so that kind of thing, I think, impacts so much more and so much for it. Like, you're allowed 3 days bereavement, and then anything more, you gotta get back to work. And I think Western culture has also perpetuated this idea that you must move through things
Very quickly.
Because capitalism doesn't stop.
Nope. No, it's true. I mean, it's it does center a lot around also what you are meant to share with children, right? This notion of, I mean, I was in all the spaces because it just wasn't a thing. The notion of childcare. You have one child, you just bring them.
To everything.
Just everything.
Everything.
They fit in the car.
They fit in the
And
car.
they need to go.
And then they're playing.
There you go.
You got,
You know,
you
and
have
did
to
I have
those.
anything to play with?
No.
What did I do under that table? I was just under a table.
Talking to yourself.
That's it. I was under a table.
Yeah.
Maybe I could pull like a fork down or something, but I need to be quiet, right? Oh, that's just Siobhan under a table, right? And that, I mean, my parents thought I was always hiding. They didn't pick me up after a lesson. And I'd call them and they'd be like, "What? We thought you were behind the couch." I was like, "For this long? Well, we just didn't have time to play hide and seek. So you left me behind the couch, theoretically, for this long? Like, neither of you noticed me gone. So I thought your father got you." Right?
The amount of times I've been standing outside of a library, didn't move, 6 hours waiting. Guilford Library seen a lot. I'm going to move on. What is, if any, a positive experience related to mental health and other invisible disability? You asked this question.
I know. There's so you know, the kind of question that's meaty that you want to dive into. And, you know, I think it's important. The reason I put this question in there, and I noticed, you know, another speaker seemed to have also something to draw out the positive, is that often that we don't think about what's been gained inside a struggle. I mean, did I engage in a lot of battles in my youth? Yes. But, you know, it gave me a sense of accomplishment, connection to community, that I was being heard, that I could bring about other people and them come into it so that they felt heard as well. With mental health, I think that when I have found positivity and joy, it's around that same kind of acknowledgement or creating space for others to also step in and say, I'm feeling this too. I'm dealing with this too, right? You know, I'm incredibly anxious. Oh, I go over that many times too. And just sitting in that truth has made me feel joyful. And when others have also spoken their truth, it's given me room to step into it as well. And I think that, you know, as someone that lives with both visible and invisible disability, it's an important thing to not have to feel like we have to gaslight ourselves, invisibilize ourselves, that our needs are too big for whatever the circumstance is. And so these can be like joyful moments when you realize, yes, I've helped create capacity and someone else has helped create capacity. And now I feel more accepted or welcome or valued in this space.
I think one of the things that brings us into is throughout the years, you have held so much of community and you've role modeled how to hold, that I've now been seeing more folks take up similar positions. And the thing that we're holding is slowly getting lighter and lighter. And I think that's something that means a lot to me, especially in intergenerational relationships with other PT BIPOC folks who have invisible and visible disabilities. Okay, what keeps you interested in doing equity, body liberation, and disability justice work still?
It's not done, basically. I mean, sometimes it does feel a lot, you know, and as I said before, there are days that things are hard and sad and really, really frustrating. Especially traveling, like to some degree, you know, there may be a level at which people are getting more used to having to engage with some of these pieces. But in traveling outside of a North American container, the body liberation stuff is hard. Like, I don't exist in in many countries. Like, there's not a chair that fits. There's not, you know, a pathway that's not problematic. It's really challenging. But I mean, the main piece that really sparks my passion and I want to speak to is the collective liberation piece. That for all of us engaged in different lived experience, the notion of rowing together towards collective liberation is key. And so, like, I've parsed out those three areas, but really they're one. You know, they're elements that say, see me clearly, let me be, love me as I am.
Thank you so much. Give it up for CU, everyone.
So it's
I'll
like
clap.
it's like a time
Okay.
strike.
So I'll clap?
It
Okay.
helps add-
Okay.
Yeah. It's okay.
So first, could you introduce us, your name, pronouns,
Yeah.
and maybe some main identifying factors on you?
Oh, okay. So my name is Joey Laguio, but my real name is actually Jose Carlos. My pronouns are he, him. I am a designer. I do digital design. I design interfaces, but I'm also a musician. I love being creative. I love thinking deeply about things in general and expressing deep things. I was an only child, and I'm a first-generation immigrant. My parents are from the Philippines. Initially, when they came here, it was hard for them to adjust, and I think some of that passed down to me. There was a lot of pressure, I think, to be something and to prove myself in a new world. But it was in a very subtle way, the way that it affected me. It wasn't always obvious, because I was always a bit of like a high-functioning performer. I was very accomplished at school. I was good at getting the grades, but it was always, there was that kind of underlying sadness, like a bit of sorrow sitting beneath me somewhere, that as I grew up, I think it became more obvious. I would call myself a bit flamboyant. I was the kind of kid who would dance in the streets and like, you know, stop my mom on the sidewalk and be like, I want to dance here and I want to like just sing. And so that was when I was really young. But as I grew up into kindergarten or grade 1, I entered school, I noticed myself just getting quieter. I was more withdrawn. In my elementary school years, I kind of just became quieter in general. I did really struggle with, I guess, you know, just being gay and trying to figure that out. And there was no one to talk to about it. And I think that was really hard for me. I almost treated it like a demerit on my resume of life. There are 2 main ways that I maintain my positive mental health, and I think one is, it's really through music. Whenever I'm just feeling down, like, especially when no one's in this house, like, I just let it rip. And that's one way that I kind of remember my own humanity, and I kind of, even if no one's listening, I kind of vote. So that's been one way, and another has just been going to counseling on a regular basis and being able to talk through things with someone. Oh, but sorry, how could I forget? Important people in my life that I really talk to and depend on and I love very much are like my partner, Matthew, who, you know, if I'm having a panic attack for like, or like an anxiety attack for multiple hours, like he'll just kind of bring me back down to earth and hold me and, oh, makes me emotional. But it's like, it's big. When I'm going through some of the hardest times in my life, for my partner to be able to hold me, that's definitely been really helpful for me. And it reminds me every day of how far I've come. I've always had a life philosophy of if I feel pain, to not just let it be pain, but to turn it into something beautiful, or helpful at least. And I think, you know, advocating for queer mental health, that's definitely a way. It's got multiple things that I identify with, you know, being queer, being very anxious as an individual. And if I could kind of let that pain help someone else, just through sharing about and talking, then yeah, I would love to. I always think about the little kid me, you know, sitting in the car, thinking about life and thinking about if I'm accepted and if I'm okay and I'm loved. And I would have loved to hear more voices that could have told me that before I had to try and wrestle it out for myself. I think celebrating queerness is important because at the end of the day, you cannot change who you are. You are who you are. And as hard as it might be, like, we need to live with ourselves and we need to love ourselves. I am who I am. I am gay. I struggle with my anxiety a lot. But the least we can try and do is to kind of be loud in whatever way that looks like for ourselves. And to be proud of that and to treat ourselves with the same humanity that we would treat our closest friend or our family. Yeah.
Give it up for Joey, everyone. We're gonna do a sound check. We're good. So glad that you're here. Nice to see you in person, Joey.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank
you.
I've got some questions for you.
Yeah.
I wonder where they came from.
I don't know.
I think they came from you.
Maybe. Who's to say?
Who's to say? The powers that be?
Yeah, someone.
Someone. Thank you so much for your video and sharing that. I know that that can be very vulnerable, having conversations about mental health.
And awkward to watch yourself like talk about it.
In a couple bit, you're gonna be like, I would love to see myself on camera more.
Maybe. It was only 5 minutes.
I think mine was 6.
It's not a competition.
It could have been 7. I'm sure yours could have also been 8.
I think it could have been.
Could have been a short
Should have
film. We'll pitch that for next year. How has anxiety affected your experience with your sexuality? What does that look like in your day-to-day experience? That is also such a good question, by the way.
I wrote it. I'm gonna say. But yeah, I think like maybe not my day to day now, but growing up, I think I definitely identified more with my anxiety as a child. I think it wasn't super obvious about my sexuality. Actually, maybe the dancing and singing might have given it away a little bit. But I think I was always a very anxious child. I was always really someone who, like as I mentioned in the video, like I thought deeply about a lot of things, sometimes like overthinking things. And I also catastrophized a lot. I would think about the worst possible case. I would have like huge stomach aches in the morning before I even knew what anxiety was. And every morning was just like, oh, I'm getting all these weird physical issues and I want to barf and I don't understand. And my parents didn't really know what was going on either. And so I really, in my childhood, anxiety was a huge, huge part of my childhood. But as I started to identify that I was attracted to men and that I was queer, it kind of collided with my anxiety in like not great ways, because I was also raised in a Catholic school. I went to Catholic school for maybe like I guess 13 years, wearing a uniform, doing the whole thing. And I think when I would often go to church, as I was supposed to go to regularly, and hear the sermons, I just remember being like really scared. I would hear about the images and where people would go if they didn't act the right way or do the right thing. And as someone who has already been super anxious, I was like thinking very deeply about, oh, well, I guess I get to spend eternity in hell. And it was like I'm like 8 years old, watching, like I'm sitting in the pews thinking about these things, and I'm seeing everyone around me like, yeah, makes sense. You know, like as they're talking about, you know, homosexuality and same-sex attraction and why that's an illness. And I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. Like, that's, yeah, sure. It looks like everyone's agreeing with it, so maybe I'll agree too. And I think, yeah, that really just led me down a path of thinking about really tough things, like going to hell. And yeah, it was tough to deal with that as a child, and especially as an anxious person. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, it's also hard not to catastrophize something when it's been painted to be this bigger thing.
Yes.
And then we have to, as children, unravel ourselves to fit
Yeah.
into an image that doesn't agree with us.
Yes, and I became so good at being what I wasn't. I was so good at being like, oh yeah, like nodding my head, doing the rounds, smiling, and you just get better and better at hiding. So, yeah, not great.
No.
Yeah.
Have there been any silver linings or positive outcomes as a result of your struggles with mental health and sexuality?
Yeah, I definitely say there have been. I think I alluded to it in the video too, but even if I'm going through a really hard time, I like to transform it into something, and I've really carried that through my life, where I've tried to. And yeah, I think one of the biggest things was being more empathetic. Like, again, I don't know what a life would have been where I was straight. I can't say, but I would like to think that being unique and queer and homosexual and wrestling with that has really made me a more empathetic individual. Even as a kid, when other people didn't know, if other people were different, I was always more kind to them, and they were like, Joey, why are you so nice to them? And I'm like, well, like, because we should be. Like it's kind of weird for me, but it's just such a given that if someone's going through something or someone's different, like, what's wrong with that? Like nothing. Like let's treat everyone with kindness. And so I think that's one of the biggest things. But I think another big thing was just like my capacity to like sing and express myself. I think I would have been a very boring singer had I not been through the things that I've been through. Because sometimes, like I sing with my group sometimes, my a cappella group or my choir or whatever, we're a vocal ensemble. We don't just do a cappella. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I had my days.
We've all been there.
No shade at all. But what was I gonna say? Yeah, like sometimes, like I think during rehearsal they were like, okay, just so everyone knows, when Joey sings, like he gets really like, he just cannot help but do it authentically. And I was like, should I be embarrassed about that? But I'm like, oh, maybe not. I'll just own it. But it was just, it's been something that I've kind of grown back into as I've grown up, because I think I mentioned in the video that I'm also someone who hid that part of myself, like hid that musical, more creative, expressive part of myself, and even now I'm still learning to kind of slowly have the bravery to get back into it. But yeah.
That's really beautiful. I really relate to that because sometimes when I do my ballads, there is not a dry eye.
But I want to hear.
I can't sing. I lip sync.
Hey, you know, if people are feeling things, that's
so
enough.
I'm a drag artist.
That's fair. You know what?
There's been, yeah, I think it's something interesting that we get to, with the time and space, explore these artistic manifestations and expressions of the things that we've dealt with and experienced. And that in itself, with the work that's being done, is rightfully deserved, but then also is a privilege.
Yes, yes.
And it's really beautiful to see that exist in so many different ways in the community. So I'm really grateful and honored to witness that. I'm gonna ask one more question. Okay, Joey?
Yeah.
Do you have any, like, no, I'm just gonna go. Boop, 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 boop,
Yeah.
boop, boop, boop. This is a good one. What do you think you were missing when you were younger that could have helped you navigate your sexuality and mental health now?
I think I was missing a lot of representation and things I could identify with in what I was watching and who I was talking to. When you grow up in a Catholic school, especially the ones that I did, it was very insulated. I had experiences where I felt like I was unique, but I didn't see myself mirrored in anyone else around me or on TV. Okay, I guess I'm laughing at this. But like when I was in high school, or like late high school, Glee came out. And controversial, very controversial. Lots of things. But I think it was the first show where I was like, oh my gosh, like they're in a relationship. I want to be in a relationship like that, and that's okay. And it was really powerful, and I love music, so it was kind of like, how could I not like
be
this?
vulnerable in the group chat?
Yeah.
I have all 6 seasons on DVD.
Oh, yeah, no, totally. Yes.
And I have all the CDs.
I do some regular rewatches, and I, have my Spotify playlist, but I don't tell anyone that until. But yes, so it was always really good to see. I remember just like when I was going through really hard times, and I was like in like high school or like early university, and I was like watching this show, and I'm like crying to myself, eating chips, and just like, oh yeah, that's what I want.
What was one of the most impactful scenes in that show that brought something up for you?
Oh man, it's embarrassing.
No, let's talk about it.
Oh god, this is not really well written. It was not a real well written part of the show, but there was like a bully in the show who was like in the closet and was treating other people who are homosexual like badly, and I like and in one season of the show, one of the later ones, he was coming to terms with that, and people found out eventually, and he was this like big football player, blah blah blah, like really masculine, and he yeah. If you know the show, you know what
and
happens.
Blaine sings cough syrup.
Like trigger, the cough syrup, exactly.
Yeah.
It was that song, and with the acting that went along with it, really. It reminded me of, I mean, I know I go through things, but like also other people go through things, and I suddenly just felt this huge, I felt a huge responsibility to speak more about it and to perform about it and to talk about it if I could. Oh, okay. Uh-oh.
That was the scene. That was the scene that I first didn't feel alone. You know?
Yeah,
so
yes,
I really,
yes.
oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
it's quite late into the show, but
The happy gaze. Right?
yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for making me cry. But I really, we could talk about this later.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm really crying.
Sorry.
I'll need a tissue. Okay, thank you so much, Joey.
I guess I did my job.
You did.
Yeah, if you could just introduce yourself.
Okay. So my name is Shetin Adams. I am a queer settler living in Vancouver now. I actually just moved here from Calgary this year. So I've been here for a few months now, and I am a professional in the executive search industry. I am a Libra, and I've had a very interesting journey with mental health, which is why I'm here today. I think my childhood was pretty good, all things considered. It wasn't, I guess it wasn't like a typical childhood. I don't think anyone can really say that they've had a typical childhood, though I don't really know what a typical childhood would look like. But I grew up with my mom. She was a single mother, and my 3 siblings, my older sister, Samira, my older brother, Salim, and my younger sister, Jamila. We grew up together in Calgary. My older brother Salim and my younger sister Jamila both have cerebral palsy, so I have a lot of experience along with my mom and my older sister Samira advocating for them and their well-being and their mental health and care and things like that. But it has not been until I've been older as a young adult that I've really started to prioritize my mental health as well, and have sort of channeled that into my own mental health and well-being as well. I think I've always felt like there was a place for me in most LGBT spaces that I've been a part of, and I do think that that's a huge privilege because I know that's not been a lot of other people's experiences. One thing I will say though is that at least maybe because I've always been in Western Canada, I find that sometimes there's not it has not really been until very, very recently that I've felt like a nice like symbiosis or like a nice like togetherness of like all the different communities that I feel a part of. I'll expand on that a little bit. So like I really love Afrobeats. I really love like R&B and hip hop. Like these are all genres that I've kind of grown up with. And I try like very often to, when I was in Calgary, like I went to pretty much every single Afrobeats event that there was just because I love Afrobeats. And you know, a lot of people from my community, like the Ghanaian community in Calgary, would go to those events, and a lot of other like West Africans and other Africans would just go to these events very often. And so I went often to, you know, meet people and be around people that I felt very comfortable with. But I didn't entirely feel very comfortable in those spaces because unfortunately, like especially in a lot of West African cultures, there's still a lot of homophobia that's very rife in our communities, and that is mainly a result of colonialism. But it's really painful to sometimes be around people that you feel comfortable in one aspect, you know, people that remind you of like back home and things like that, but not really feel very like it's almost like you have to hide a part of yourself to keep the peace because you don't know if someone's gonna say something homophobic or like something like that. And you know, if you go like with a partner, which I have done, like I've gone to Afrobeats events with my girlfriend in Calgary, sometimes like you just gotta be a little bit careful because, you know, sometimes it doesn't really feel that accepting and welcoming. And similarly, when I've been in a lot of LGBT spaces, sometimes, or in a lot of cases, they tend to be mainly like dominated by white people, or you know, I don't really see many Black or African people at these events, at LGBT events. And so sometimes it kind of feels like I have to be like a spokesperson for my whole community, like, or like all of Ghanaian, like queer Ghanaians or queer West Africans, and that can be a lot of pressure. And I when I go to those events, that I don't really see many Black faces or a lot of African faces, or like there's never any Afro beats or any music that reminds me of my childhood or back home or anything like that. That can be very isolating as well. But I will say that recently I have been going to some events in Vancouver that have really surprised me by like I went to an Afrobeats event recently in Vancouver that I was able to meet a lot of other queer Africans like at this Afrobeats event, and that was so cool. Like I think I was like riding the high of going to that event for like days after, and I think it's like so hard to explain how good that feels to just meet other people who are just like you, because I think like as much as you try, or as much as you can tell yourself that you should not feel ashamed and you should like take up space, I think it's so much easier to embody those beliefs when you actually see people that like living life and just having fun and being accepted, that come from your communities. That's like so powerful, so empowering. And then, I've also noticed like kind of a shift when I go to a lot of LGBT events. Like lately there's been a huge push for, putting marginalized folks, putting people of color, like at the forefront of a lot of these organizations and movements. And I'm seeing that that's like something that's slowly becoming more commonplace in a lot of these organizations. And that's something that is really encouraging to me as well, because I kind of see like a difference. I think just maybe because of this like global push we're having of inclusivity and being more welcoming and visibility and that sort of thing, I'm feeling like I don't feel as isolated as I once did. And yeah, like when I go to Afrobeats events that are not explicitly queer or anything like that, like I still see people that are openly queer these days. This is a very recent development. I see people that are like openly queer and African at these events now, like, and like I'll see someone do like a dip on the floor and like people will start voguing, or like I'll see like other like, gay couples like there. And, I feel for the first time recently, I've felt more comfortable, being able to dance freely with my girlfriend at these events. And yeah, it's really nice and beautiful to see. And I think even before I started seeing that these events have been more inclusive, as I said, I have always kind of felt like there was space for me at these places, like at least to some extent. I guess like it's more like I've never been afraid of taking up space, or like I've never been afraid of like if I'm in a space that doesn't feel like it was created or meant for me. I've never shied away from the challenge of, I guess, like making space for myself at these events, but it's nice to see that it seems like there's more of an actual curated effort to make them more inclusive to people. If you meet other people and you create these relationships with other people, like you kind of have this sense that like that the world is so much bigger than what you might think, or like there's so much opportunity, and like sometimes it's really easy to focus on like things that can really go wrong. And that's something I'm still trying to help, like I'm trying to really like remember not to just focus on how things can go wrong, but someone told me recently to also try and think of like how things can go right too. Like things can really, really change. So yeah, seek out community would be my number one piece of advice. And yeah, just lean on your people when you can, because guaranteed people care about what you're going through.
Oh, what an image. I'm so grateful that you're here.
Thank you, Jay. I'm grateful you're here too.
Oh, shall we get into it?
Let's get into it.
Well, first, let's warm up a bit.
Okay.
What was the last Queer Vancouver event that blew your mind?
That blew my mind, probably. So I'm going to an event, another iteration of the event I'm going to mention, Babes on Babes, is what it's called. I'm going to that today, and that's probably the last queer Vancouver event that really blew my mind, because I've never been to any event like that before. Like I said in my video, I was raised in Calgary, and obviously Calgary doesn't really, well, maybe not obviously, if you don't know, Calgary doesn't really have as big of a queer scene as we have here in Vancouver. So the idea of like 3 floors of gay women dancing is pretty mind-blowing and really fun. And the DJs are awesome and the vibes are great, so that's probably the last event.
We
Not
love to
sponsored. I should be.
Who knows? It's a big community, which is delicious
Yeah.
and beautiful, and
Totally.
we get to like relish in it.
Yeah.
Which is
It's a huge privilege.
right. You know what? My favorite thing right now is complaining about which 3 queer events I want to go to at any given
know.
night.
What a problem to have, right?
Right? Ah,
Who would have thought?
how fruitful. So let's get into some of these questions that you've sent.
Sure.
That can be so daunting, but I'm really grateful we're here together.
I feel like my questions were a lot like more basic than everyone else's questions, though. I'm like, I should have put more thought into
You could
that.
also just be like, actually, I want to talk about this.
Okay.
We're totally okay with that. I'm going to skip the first one.
Okay.
And I'm going to go to the second one because I feel like we can have
Sure.
some deeper conversations with that.
Okay.
What's been the greatest revelation that you've had about your mental health?
I think the greatest revelation I've had in my mental health journey has been that it's not as linear as I think I once thought it should be. Like, I think as I've gotten older and the issues that I deal with have gotten more complex, and like my networks of support have changed, and you know, my capacity to deal with certain things has changed as well. I think I've had to really reckon with the fact that, you know, I might make progress in one aspect of my mental health journey one day, and then something could happen that makes me backslide. And I think that you know, growing up, like I don't think I had much forgiveness for myself, like if I ever were to backslide. And I think sometimes the image that we have of mental wellness and of taking care of yourself mentally is this sort of really linear, this linear idea, right? That you have an issue and you deal with it, you seek support, and then you're kind of good, right, for the rest of your life. But yeah, it's way more nuanced than that. It's way more sort of up and down, and you know, you discover new things about yourself and about the people around you, and about your, as I mentioned, your capacity to deal with things. And yeah, I think healing it's really, you know, it's I think if you have a spirit of wanting to continuously learn, then healing is not necessarily always going to be so linear. There are going to be moments that you backslide, or you might disappoint yourself, or you might surprise yourself. And I think just being open to receiving any kind of energy that you might get from yourself, and open to experiencing your mental health journey for what it is, and not trying to force yourself to follow this like linear path of healing and wellness. I think that's been the main thing I've discovered and had to reckon with in my own journey. If that makes sense.
It makes the most sense.
Okay.
I really, this whole idea that to move through things in a linear way is such a colonial understanding of time.
Totally,
as
of
well.
time, relationships, everything. Yeah. So yeah, we can go on for that for hours.
hours and hours and hours. Where's our podcast?
Yeah, honestly. I'll talk to you about that after.
We'd have fun. This is a question I really like, and I'm really glad you submitted this. Is
Okay.
What does mental wellness look for you?
Okay, I think mental wellness for me looks like community. I think like a really strong community, and it also looks like rest. I think, you know, as marginalized people, I feel like there sometimes can feel like this almost usually self-imposed burden to carry sort of the traumas of not only the things that you've experienced in your personal life, but maybe the things that ancestors or elders in your community have experienced, that you feel like you need to like carry that cross for them, or that you need to live your life in a way that sort of honors the trauma and the pain that your people have experienced. And that can take a lot of time and energy. And even though it's beautiful work, it's really exhausting, right? And I think sometimes we're not, I mean, no matter who you are, you're not really afforded much time to rest in this world. Like, not if you want to make money and like, you know, afford rent and things like that. Like, you kind of need to be, you almost don't have a choice but to be stretched to your limit, right? Especially if you're trying to like also have time to cultivate those relationships and to delve into your interests and things like that. If you really want to be a well-rounded person, it's almost impossible to do so while also being well-rested. But that's kind of a narrative that I don't really want to ascribe to anymore. Like I really want to prioritize rest. So I think for me, I feel like rest is almost it's almost like revolutionary in a way. Like to take time for myself, that's just for me to meditate or to sleep or to really just do nothing, like literally nothing, and just sit down. I'm trying to get rid of this idea that it's like if I'm not being productive in some way that I'm wasting time or that I'm yeah, just that I'm wasting time because I think it almost is like a colonial tool to keep us not well rested as well, because when you're not well rested you don't really have the energy to advocate for yourself or for your community, or you don't have the capacity to actually fight these systems that keep you oppressed. So I think mental wellness for me right now looks like cultivating community and resting a lot.
That's really beautiful to hear. One thing that comes to mind is Vancouver's Black Therapy Fund. Have you been made aware of that?
I heard of it literally maybe an hour ago. I didn't even know that existed. I'm very new to Vancouver, so if there are any other resources people want to share, please let me know. It totally is hard to find a therapist out here. Like it really is. So I haven't heard of that, but it sounds awesome. I definitely want to
It's
hear
such
more.
a radical, I don't want to say radical in the sense that it is focusing care and community first and prioritizing accessing therapy, because therapy costs money.
Yeah.
And then you have to work to get money.
Yeah.
And then you have to work to go to therapy to survive
Yeah.
the workplace.
Exactly.
And the
It's
city
endless.
and the thing. And it's this
endless.
cyclical thing. And
Yeah.
so the idea to crowdfund and mutual aid
Yeah.
into accessing care, I think, is so important. And that's what makes me think of that, there's so much hope here to create that community, to foster that.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely gonna look more into that after this event.
There's some really great things happening in this city.
Yeah, there really are. That's something I've really appreciated a lot about my time here, is that I've been able to experience community in a way that I don't think I was really able to experience before. And I think part of that just comes from leaving the town that you can't really call Calgary a town, leaving the city that you grew up in. It kind of forces you to find your own way. But I was really surprised by how many opportunities there are in this city to find community. So yeah, it's been nice.
I'm gonna ask one more question.
Sure.
Okay. What does being queer and Black play a role in your mental wellness journey?
Well, I think that I feel like the other panelists have touched on this so beautifully, that it's really impossible to take out or exist as one part of your identity, right? They're so tied and they're so intertwined in so many ways. And being Black is one thing, and then being African is a whole other experience that is also very specific in the way that mental health issues are dealt with and spoken about. And similarly to some of the other panelists, religion has been a huge part of our colonial history in Ghana and a lot of African countries. And in pretty much every Black community in the world, religion has been used as a tool to sort of keep people oppressed. So I think there's so many different things at play that affect my mental health. And at the risk of speaking too much, because I know that we're on a time crunch now, I'll just say that that all aspects of my identity sort of work together to make me, I guess, the person that I am. And unfortunately, just by virtue of the systems of oppression that we live under, I think it's kind of impossible to escape some of the mental health challenges that I've experienced. But I also think that a lot of the aspects of my identity have sort of informed my ability to deal with those things and to approach them in ways that that maybe I wouldn't have been able to approach them if I didn't have these lived experiences. So I think in a way, these parts of my identity kind of, they have been a reason why I've experienced some mental health challenges, but they've also been a reason why I'm able to deal with them in the way that I've been able to. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you could go back to a time when you were at your lowest, what would you say to yourself? I am going to start with Jeanette.
That's a great question. I think this is kind of cliche, but like telling myself it's going to get better. And, you know, the despair I felt wasn't going to last forever. And Joy, when you were talking about like being used to like not speaking up and kind of being silent all the time, I remember driving to the mall with my mom once, probably early 20s. I was driving, she was in the passenger seat, and I was just crying in silence, struggling with all this, and she had no idea. She was just oblivious to what was happening, and like that's a memory I think I'll carry with me for a long time. Like, and it just feels like when you're in that state, like you just think this is life now, this is normal, this is how it's going to be forever. But yeah, I think just having faith that it'll get better and you'll meet a community and you'll be sitting on a panel with some amazing queer folks. You know, it's never would have imagined it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Joey?
Yeah, I think I'd say, maybe it's particular to me, but I guess I would say be loud in your own way. I think I've always struggled when I initially came out. It was like, oh, so Joey's gonna get all like, you know, she's gonna dance now. He's gonna get all, you know. And I think for me, maybe it just looks a little bit different. You know, what being loud meant for me was like, oh no, I'm just gonna own it when I don't like something. And maybe that doesn't have to be like loud necessarily, but it is very assertive and even maybe a little bit not what I perceive my personality to be, counterintuitive to me. So yeah, I would say just be loud in your own way and kind of stand in that. And again, something I'm still working on. So yeah.
Shetin?
Oh man, I think if I could go back to a time when I was at my lowest, I would probably say to myself that nothing is permanent. As cliche as that sounds, I think that that has been something that has been very revolutionary for me and the way that I deal with a lot of the things that I go through, because I think even like scientifically, like your brain actually cannot be in a state of like, for example, panic for very long. Like there usually is like you hit a threshold and then you kind of come back to baseline and then you might get panicked again, but you will come back to a base level at some point. At my lowest point, I think that was really hard to believe. And I think honestly, I'm probably still recovering from the lowest point of my mental health. I'm still trying to get back to who I think I was before, or not really get back to who I was before, because I think we're always changing and evolving. But just knowing that there will be a time, if I could tell myself, like there's going to be a time that you're at least baseline, like normal again. You'll even feel happiness at some points again. Like you will be excited for things again. Like even if it seems so hard to believe, like it will happen at some point, because that's how you're biologically wired. So that's what I tell myself.
CEO, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're told from when we were kids, you see a little one crying and you're like, you want to stop them crying. You want to dry their tears and make it okay and make them not be sad or not be angry or not be whatever. And I think that as we grow, we use that same internal language with ourselves and say, okay, I'm feeling shitty right now. No, I should not feel shitty right now. You are not right for feeling shitty. You're not okay letting yourself be sad or grieving or anxious. And I think that narrative that is essentially saying you should not have permission to feel how you feel, that's the piece that needs to be silenced. That's the piece that needs to be gentled, and to say, feel what you need to feel and when you need to feel it, and and give yourself space, because it's not going to be forever. But being rushed through by your own internal narration is pretty shitty. So recognize it, know where it comes from, and love yourself the way you would your closest friend. We don't usually give ourselves that kind of care. We're,
Would you do this to your best friend? And the answer is always no.
yeah,
We wouldn't.
stand over their bed and say, good grief, what's with you? Suck it up.
I think to finish that, I personally would say that there will be a time where there will be such an abundance of love for you that it will prove that some of these adults in your life who are telling you otherwise, that like you are so worthy of every step you're going to take and every breath you're going to breathe. And also that you still have so much heart to show. So why take that away from so many others in the future? So I think this is going to be our last question. And this is not from me. This is from no one on the panel, but I think this is a great question on how we can provide some tangible ways for some folks who may not know. But the person asking the question says, I'm queer but do not identify as Black, Indigenous, or as a person of color. How can I support queer BIPOC communities? That does sound like a large question, but maybe if we feel comfortable providing one thing, and then also with the nuance that maybe these white queers should pay us more money. Right? Yeah? Okay. I think I'll start with Shetin.
That's a really good question. I think I actually need more time to think about this.
Okay.
I'm going to double this and pass it to the next person.
I'm going to go to
Well, I think.
I was like,
I think when it comes to being queer and being BIPOC, and we talked about this, I think several of us did. There's so many intersections and layers to it that a white queer person might not have that lens that we look through, right? Mm-hmm. So I think holding space for our stories and not, it's I can't remember who was saying, but like often queer spaces are very white, right? And I think all of us have had to carve out a space for ourselves and stand up and say, like, no, we're here as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just holding space for us, hearing our stories, and not speaking for us. Not, all queer people don't have the same blanket story. We don't all have the same experiences, and making space for each other, I think, is really important.
Joey.
I don't think I actually have a good answer to this question, but I what I will say is I think just to help elevate and raise other people's stories, maybe don't speak on behalf, but share my story or share other people's story, and I think that's something small. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. CEO.
Okay. Here's the thing. BIPOC communities, as much as we hope, are not necessarily always supportive to each other. There's a lot inside the B, the I, and the POC, right? And oftentimes the narrative is if you are BIPOC, you are going to find your people and you are going to find your home and your comfort. I have concern and anxiety over ending on a less than positive note. But the truth is, I'll just speak in relation to anti-Black racism. Anti-Black racism can be perpetrated by anyone. It can be perpetrated by Black folks. It is a narrative that embraces the hierarchy inside of white supremacy and says, this is what I am aligning with. It's capitalist. It's about productivity. It's about not resting. It's about what you're doing, when you're doing. Does it have an outcome that is worthy? I have to retrain myself to not expect that because I'm in a queer BIPOC community, that my story is heard, understood, valued, and that there's a gentleness that lets me be me.
Mm-hmm.
I try to engage in an authentic way with everyone. And the hope is that inside of that offer of generosity, that I will find my people, whether it's inside a Q BIPOC community or not. Was it all skin folk, ain't kinfolk kind of thing, right? And it's just, I have been hurt. I've been deeply wounded by people of culture or people of color maintaining white supremacy tactics. That is truth. It is a deeper hurt than if it came from the white community because of the expectation that we're going to do better with each other. How can I support? Notice, ask the questions. Are there any other stories that want to be shared? Are there any other perspectives in the room? Invite in people to share what is particular to them, and don't assume that because you got one Black person that they're speaking for everybody, or one South Asian person that they're speaking for everybody, because that happens. That's the shorthand that says, we already heard your story. We covered you. So notice, ask questions, make capacity. People do not notice how often, you included, they're taking up space, and there might be other voices. It's not necessarily the one that raises their hand first that has the most valuable thing to say, or the one that's talking longest, right? Although I am quite insightful. But, notice, oh, you know what? We've heard a lot from you today. Let's see if there's some other people in the room that have something that wants to be shared. Raise up the people that may be struggling. Offer alternatives to speaking out loud. Can't tell you how many times I just put a jar there with some paper, and it's like, you know what? If you don't want to be called on, write your paper. We have a break. I'll come back. I'll see some questions, and I'll just answer them in that way. Make for some variance in how people can be in the space.
Thank you. That is very, very important. Thank you, Sia. Shetin, did you want to add? Have you had some thoughts?
Yeah, everyone's contributions to that question are so incredible. Siobhan, I think everything you touched on was so relevant and topical, and I think I'll be building off a little bit of on what you said. I think, it's so easy to sort of give a really blanket answer to such a loaded question like this, and I think the default, especially recently, has been like, just support these businesses that are owned by these people of color and Black and Indigenous people of color. Support these businesses. Go to these events, do this. And while I do think that is a form of support, certainly for sure, I don't necessarily know. There's something to unpack in the assumption that creating more or creating more capitalists, I guess, is a really long-term form of support, but that's a whole other conversation that we can go into. But I think that the real support comes from leaning in and understanding and actually creating meaningful relationships with people that are Black, Indigenous, people of color, that are not just based on inviting them to speak about their racial trauma for your events that you're running, right? Or, actually maintaining real relationships with people. Because I've been invited to events that were hosted by white allies who, it wasn't even an expressly a queer event or anything like that, but somehow as soon as I come in, then people want to start talking about like, oh, Shetin, like, you know, so tell us a little bit about okay, I went to this like event one time, right? It was a party, just a normal party, a birthday party. And I was like getting a beer from the table, and the hostess was like, yeah, you know, this is Shetin, like I know her from way back. Shetin, she's like an activist, like, you know, let's talk about like, you know, some activist things. But it was such an awkward thing because I was like, bitch, like I'm here to just party and like I'm not here to talk about, you know, like fight the power. Like I'm really here just to like have fun. So yeah, while asking questions is okay, like also acknowledge the personhood, right? Like acknowledge the fact that like that's, you know, if you want to be my friend, if you want to be like a real ally, let's actually have like a real friendship that doesn't feel so transactional. Because I think sometimes it can really feel like not only like are you tokenized, but like your only worth to a lot of these white allies is your contribution to like some kind of diversity event that makes them feel better about themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is you don't really have meaningful relationships with these people. You don't really get to know who they are as people. You don't really get to have that authentic empathy that you actually need to deconstruct a lot of these colonial constructs. So yeah, it's a very loaded question. I wish we had more time to discuss.
I think so too. It's also, I'm not gonna lie, it's a very white question.
Yeah.
Because there are so many times in which I enter spaces and people are like, oh my gosh, Jay, oh, you're so brave. Can we talk about that? And I'm like, I want to flirt with a bartender.
Yeah.
And I want to dance. Yeah. And I want to get a hickey.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about my childhood trauma.
Yeah.
But then that's how so many folks see us is immediately they're like, I'm going to be the most supportive person. And I just want to say, I saw you this one time share this one thing in an educational space.
And that's all you are.
And that is all we ever become. Yeah. And it's like, you then put us into a box and you want us to perform in those parameters.
Yeah.
And the best way to support us is sometimes leaving us alone. But then also there are so many times where we go to things and we go to events and we go to, and there's one or two people who may look like us or have similar stories. And it's like, white folks, you could be saying, hey, that's actually not good enough. That's not fair. That's not accurate. And so there's many different ways that a white person can also just educate themselves on that. Yeah. Looks into the camera. So thank you so much. Give a round of applause for our amazing I've got some closing remarks, okay? And my panelists, you can make whatever face you want as I say this. Again, Pride would not be possible without our corporate support. We would like to thank our event sponsor, GeoComply, and our season sponsor, TD. We would like to thank our community partners. Thank you so much to Delina Coffee, Fat Mao, and Coco Mo. Thank you so much. We would also like to thank the Urban Native Youth Association, Two Spirit Collective. We would also like to thank Vancouver Black Therapy and Advocacy Fund, Community Health Initiative for Men, Foundry, and the UBC Pride Collective for working with us as a community partner for this event. Lastly, we thank Vancouver Black Library for the event space and supporting us throughout the Winter Pride season, and Queer-Based Media for interviewing all panelists and for editing all their videos for the live in-person event. And thank you so much to everyone who's been involved in this work. That is also Vancouver Pride Society. So many folks, and if I'm correct, has the most QT BIPOC staff ever, and are doing such fundamental, important work.
Thank you for joining us for this learning series, and thank you to all of our speakers in the Vancouver Pride Society for shining a light on these important issues. We look forward to continuing the conversation and continuing to elevate these voices in our communities. Thanks, and see you again soon.